includes the media that's in cahoots with the government. It includes much of the academic world. It includes a lot of public intellectuals, with a few heroic exceptions like you. But once you see through it, once you realize that the government has its own motives, the government is not actually interested in the common good or the public good. The government is a parasite on the rest of society, and it benefits itself, and it benefits those agencies and institutions that are in cahoots with it in private society. But that it's not, they're not actually out for the common good. They don't actually care about our freedom. In fact, it's just the opposite. They're the enemy of our freedom. They're the enemy of our economic well-being. And again, I think that if in a crisis like the one we're in, the economic crisis, which I'm afraid is going to get worse, one good thing about that sort of a situation is radical change is possible. All of a sudden, people become open to radical ideas. You mentioned before dangerous radicalism. Well, of course, this is dangerous only to the bad guys. It's not dangerous to the cause of freedom. And so I actually am optimistic as I see more and more people interested, for example, in the Federal Reserve, more and more people opposed to the wars and to the empire. I think in this crisis, they're going to try to extract even more money from us through taxes and inflation for all their various schemes. But I think there's going to be a lot of opposition. I think we've got an interesting few years ahead of us, and it sure is a great thing that you're out there speaking and writing and telling the truth.
Well, I do, thank you for your kind words, but let me stress that, a couple of things. It's pretty nerve-wracking out here. Now that I think some of the things we're saying are really kind of making a greater impact, the level of hate speech directed, at me, at my message, online, for instance, is really going through the roof. And so also just knowing what I know about closing societies, it's nice to have people like you and me and, our various colleagues across the spectrum out there kind of beating the drum. We're not going to all be safest until, millions of us are out there. And that is what is called for, closing society. You can't kind of leave it to anyone but a collective consciousness to shift. So I do want to say that. And it could be just that, I'm a mother of two children. So if I were childless, I'd probably be kind of out there on the barricades going, bring it on. But instead, I'm out there on the barricades going, please join me,
Well, of course that's right.
All.
No, I'm a father, too, and I agree with that. And I had a friend recently write me and said, don't worry, I'm going to send you oranges when you're in the FEMA camp.
Oh, God.
So, yeah, of course, there's no question this is a very frightening and desperate situation. But what's our choice? Our choice is either to go along or we have to fight it.
We have no choice. And thank you for prompting me to say that. One thing I'm always telling audiences, and I know it's true, is that people have a very mistaken idea from having not lived in an actual police state, that if you just keep your head down, you'll be okay. But that's a very dangerous delusion, that there is no safety in a police state. I just want to remind people, it doesn't matter if you've voted, with the regime your whole life, or if you're, a wholehearted evangelical. It doesn't matter. There's no safety in a police state through silence. The only safety is when millions of citizens challenge and take action against this closing down. But there are two more things I want to say about what you just said before. Okay, I believe that people who share, your worldview and the worldview that I'm increasingly kind of feeling sympathetic toward are very good at critical analysis, but I see less practical recommendations for action. And, of course, I've made some, movements in that direction with the last third of the book, which are these 55 action steps. But do you ever want your kind of team, your supporters, to be more proactive about, here it comes, what do we do about it?
Well, I think that's, in fact, part of the division of labor. Some people are more engaged in intellectual work, others more in activism, and I don't think these are at all opposed. But at least my own role is to try to make people understand what's going on. Sometimes I think political action is actually very much of a negative, and buying into the system, and it really doesn't make a huge difference which of these parties is elected to power. The same economic groups. Barack Obama's largest donor is Goldman Sachs. He's the we've got Wall Street candidate A and Wall Street candidate B. So to sort of throw yourself into one side of the partisan thing seems to me a mistake. On the other hand,
no, of course. But what about creating a movement that
absolutely,
restores power to
yes,
people?
Magnificent, yes, absolutely. Organizing, writing, speaking, and changing people's minds. I think minds are being changed. I think people are. I think back to a similar economic period in the early 1930s, virtually nobody understood what was going on, what had happened. Now a lot of people do understand what's going on, and there's a lot more opposition to the welfare state, to the warfare state, to the Wall Street state, and I think we all have, but absolutely activism in the form of organizational, and even when Ron Paul ran for president, I thought that was a magnificent thing.
Something that came to me a couple of days ago from a reader. He gave me a couple of pages of the actual text of the bailout bill, which has now been passed. And nobody has covered this. And I had no idea about it, but it made permanent forever, unless it's repealed, a provision that the IRS can now show, information about anyone to any government agency. Like they can take my returns and show them to, the Justice Department or the FBI. Without any notification, if I understand this correctly. It was just like buried in there. And that kind of thing also contextualized to me, like, why the franticness, why the urgency, why the threats, if we're going to believe Brad Sherman, who said on C-SPAN that individual members of the House were, presumably by the White House, being told that if they didn't pass the bailout bill, there would be, quote-unquote, martial law in America. Again, I'm a reporter, so that he said it. It's on C-SPAN. I haven't seen a second source confirm it, but certainly there was a great deal of urgency, and now we're stuck with this. And it's had no coverage. So a Constitution Party could be a pressure group to block, to challenge, to penalize leaders who collude with that kind of treacherous behavior.
Certainly, also this bill gives the IRS all new powers to set up front organizations, front businesses, and to trick people and entrap people, so that the IRS can now, for example, set up a tax, an H&R Block kind of a company where they do tax preparation. They can then suggest to you that, hey, you really don't have to pay these taxes. You can do this and then arrest you when you go along.
Oh my God! So you had heard about that?
Oh yeah, and so this is there's many horrible things in this bill, just like in the Patriot Act, right? In these kinds of situations, they've had their wish list for a long time, these people within the state. And then they use the crisis to, pass vast expansions of power for themselves. But there's horrific stuff in this. It went from 3 pages to, 453 pages.
Right.
And what's in there is not all nice things. I hate to shock anybody's sense of civics as they were taught in elementary school. But the government is, not for the public interest. It's opposed to the public interest. It's, in fact, the enemy of the American people. And everything they do, especially during a crisis like this, is evil with a capital E. The actual axis of evil is, the judiciary, the Congress, and the presidency.
Well, it definitely reframes who our most urgent enemies are and who the most serious bad guys are. I mean, what I've been saying to people for some time now is, it's very interesting that the Times reported this morning, and, certainly we can have our questions about the Times, but some of their reporting on these issues is still sound. They reported that the former head of MI5 in Britain, Stella Rimington, I believe is her name, was saying that the U.S. approach to terrorism is very counterproductive, and that she and others in Britain are calling for a rollback of the kind of surveillance society, stripping of habeas corpus society that had been going along in a mission creep, certainly the way ours has, and that she is calling for restoring civil liberties and democratic processes as being the best safeguard against terrorism. And she said she doesn't agree that there's a global war on terror, that it's a crime, and it should be treated as a crime. And what I've been saying to audiences for some time is, yes, we are facing, terrorists, just like Spain and England faced terrorists, and they dealt with them in civil processes and put the transcripts on the internet in the case of Spain, but that we've got to understand that we've got, if we lose our freedoms, we have worse enemies, we have worse problems than terrorism.
Well, terrorism is such an infinitesimal problem as compared to what we face from the federal government. And even when they killed like 1 million innocents in Iraq in response to what Osama bin Laden did. So this is, hardly responsible. It's hardly appropriate. It's hardly a just war. It's, in fact, a very evil war of aggression. But that's, of course, been most of the U.S. wars throughout history have been wars of aggression to take away other people's freedoms, not to protect our freedoms.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. I